Hey guys, Kakarot197 again with another question of the week. And this time, it's a simple question that requires a very long answer. Max Breslin asked, could you explain the letters in the UC model numbers? Like, it's clear that MS6 equals Mobile Suit 6 or MSN04 is new type Mobile Suit number 4. But what about like RX, AMX, or RMS? And, well, Max, not only will we be going over the letters, we'll also be going over the numbers because depending on like which faction we're talking about, they do have different meanings. This then also means that I won't be able to cover everything in one video, so in this video we're going to be covering the early Universal Century up to and including Unicorn, and then in part 2 we'll do the rest of the Universal Century. And before we go any further into this topic, I want to make clear that not all model numbers have their meaning explicitly stated. So a lot of the things I'll be talking about in this video are educated guesses based on things I've picked up on over the years, stuff I saw on like one really good website from Angel Fire, which I'll have linked down below, so you can check that out too, and stuff that I've read in like source books like this one right here. So, starting off with the Federation, the most famous one here is of course the RX series, to which the gun tank, the gun cannon, and the Gundam belong. And the R most likely stands for Rempo, which is Federation in Japanese, although it could potentially mean robot, again, never officially stated as far as I know, and then the X most likely stands for experimental. The first two digits then are the year that research began on it, and then the final digit is the version of the machine. So the RX-78-2 is the second version of the Gundam that had its research started in Universal Century 0078. Next up is the RB, which is used for the balls, and then this most likely means Rempo ball. RGC is next, and I've often seen this as meaning Rempo gun cannon, although I personally lean more towards Rempo general cannon. The reason for this is that RGC is typically seen used for gym cannons and not gun cannons, and the one mass production gun cannon that we know about also uses the RX designation, so because of this, GC standing for gun cannon seems a bit weird in my opinion. Then next up we have RGM, which is typically said to mean either one of two things: Rempo Gundam Mass, because it's the mass production version of the Gundam, or Rempo General Model, because it became the general model of the Federation. Basically this is the catch-all for any mass production machine that the Federation used. And personally, I lean more towards the Rempo General Model because then there's some consistency with the RGC model number that I also lean more towards. Another reason then that I feel that it's Rempo General Model is if you look at some of the later mass production machines like the J-Gun or the Heavy Gun, those weren't based on a Gundam but were standalone mass production machines that were developed as such. Then, confusingly enough, there is another model number floating around for Federation mass production machines, and that is the RMS number, which most likely stands for Rempo Mobile Suit. Now, the difference with RGM that I've seen is that RGM is from Gundam types, whereas RMS units were developed as themselves. However, because of what I just said, I don't feel like this explanation really stands up to scrutiny. Instead, I feel like the Federation simply switched from RGM to RMS for a while, potentially due to Titan's influence, because when the Titans went up, that's when the shift happened, and conveniently they switched back to RGM once the Titans were going down. And that also conveniently happened at around the time that the Federation was trying their hardest to get rid of all Titan's influences. So proof of this would then be the first Federation unit to emerge after their split with the Titans, the Gym 3, which again uses the RGM designation rather than the RMS designation. And talking about RGM versus RMS, this is also a good time to be talking about the numbers that follow those letters. Now, for most units, as I've said before, the Federation used the year that development started as the model number for that machine. For example, the aforementioned RX-78 Gundam started development in UC0078, and the RGM-86R Gym 3 started development in UC0086. During the time that the Federation switched to the RMS designation, the numbers also took a different meaning. Now the first two digits were for the place of development, and the last number was simply a sequential unit designation. So 10 is Granada, 11 is Luna 2, 12 is Campe Island, 13 is the Gate of Sedan, 14 is Pezin, 15 is New Guinea, 16 is Kilimanjaro, 17 is Grips, and then both 18 and 19 are for Jabro. And this wasn't just the case for the RMS units, but also for the RX units that were developed at that time. Now, a special unit that had both an RGM and an RMS designation was the Gym 2, and there is also a good reason behind that. Units with RGM-79R signify that that's an old RGM-79 that was upgraded or refined into a Gym 2. The RMS-179 units then were newly built Gym 2s. So moving those numbers aside, we go back to the letters. RAG is for Federation Marine units and can either be interpreted as Rempo Aquatic Gundam or Rempo Aquatic General. And my argument for General this time is that the Aqua Gym was actually the first Marine unit developed, and that it was then customized into a Gundam unit, also known as the Waterproof Gundam. And this Gundam has an extra G in its model number, which I then believe does stand for Gundam. RMV then most likely stands for Rempo Mobile Vehicle and is used for the descendants of the gun tank, because after the gun tank got mass produced, they kind of figured that the gun tank wasn't as much of a mobile suit as it was a mobile vehicle, which, let's be honest, it was. Then FA stands for Full Armor, and we again get into a Gundam versus General debate with the RGZ designation. Now, this was first used with the RIGZ, which we know stands for Refined Gundam Zeta, so a lot of people have also assumed that this then means that RGZ, the model number, also stands for Refined Gundam Zeta. But personally, I feel that Rempo General Zeta would be more appropriate because it stays in line with the other model numbers. Then there is RAS, which is a very new designation, which was only seen in the Anksha from Gundam Unicorn, so nobody really has any idea what it stands for, and my best educated guesses are either Rempo Aerial Suit or like Rempo Aerial Superiority. On to the rest of the Air Force then, things are quite different because their normal fighters are FF, which I guess could mean Federation Fighter, so they switched to English here from Japanese. And then for their experimental units, they do follow kind of along with the rest of the Federation and have an X designation as well. So we have the FF6 Tin Cod and the FFX7 Core Fighter. And then finally, for the main machines of the Federation, there's also two machines with, as far as I know, a unique model number that I have no explanation for. The D50C Lodo and the FD03 Gustav Karl. Now, while I do have an educated guess for the Gustav Karl, the Lodo, I don't have a clue. It doesn't seem to follow any kind of naming convention with the Federation, and the only thing I could say is that looking at its successor unit, the F50D, that is a machine from the Formula project, and in the Formula series, F5 is used to designate an armored fighting vehicle. But that almost seems like more of an homage to the Lodo as opposed to explaining what the 50 of the Lodo means. It just seems to confirm that 50 really is just a random number with some letters thrown into it. But hey, maybe in the future we'll get a better explanation. As for the Gustav Karl then, my best guess is that it stands for Fujita design, because the version of the Gustav Karl that most people are familiar with is the redesign done by Fujita. Of course, this is going then with the assumption that it wasn't given a model number in the novel because the novel version was designed by Moriki Yasuhiro. So yeah, if anyone has any better ideas on those two, leave a comment down below. As for now, we move on to the Federation New Type Labs, which also had their own model numbers. MRX is for Murasame Renpo Experiment, which are mobile suits designed at the Murasame New Type Labs. Then we have ORX, which means Augusta Renpo Experiment. These are units designed at the Augusta Labs, because the thing is, if you write Augusta in katakana, it's written with an O and not with an A. So that kind of makes sense if you look at it from a Japanese perspective. Or, to make things confusing, it could also stand for Oakland New Type Labs, and then for yet other machines, it could even stand for both of them, because they were partially developed at both of the facilities. And then things get even more confusing when we add NRX into the mix. And here, explanations vary extremely widely. I've seen it mentioned as just New Type Labs. I've seen it mentioned as an unknown New Type Lab that starts with an N. And then apparently, according to some sources, it stands for, again, the Oakland New Type Labs for some reason, because both the Bound Dog and the Oshimar, which were confirmed to be developed at the Oakland New Type Labs, have an NRX model number. So you're really gonna have to decide for yourself here what you want to make of this, because I've even read on the Japanese Wikipedia page that some sources will contradict themselves on like a page-by-page basis. And then the final official new type number that we know about is CRX, which is for the Pyongyang New Type Labs, which is probably either from the Korean name for Korea Chosen or the Japanese name for the Korean Peninsula, Choson. Now you might be thinking to yourself, I don't know any mobile suits that start with CRX. Well, the sad thing for these New Type Lab model numbers is that they don't just apply to the mobile suits, but also for the new type, well, the cyber new type test subjects, which really shows you how much they care for them. And then there is one more number that you might be familiar with, which is from a video game, and that is LRX, which is for the Leipzig New Type Lab units. And talking about new types, Paptimus Scirocco also had a habit of making his own units and gave them his own designation, PMX. Paptimus Mobile Experiment, and then followed by a sequential number. Moving on to Anaheim then, their general machines were MSA, Mobile Suit Anaheim. Sounds logical, although in some cases I believe that it could also mean Mobile Suit AUG, because Karaba units actually got their own designation, and I kind of feel like the AUG was more of a big brother to Karaba, so it would make sense that the AUG also got their own designation. So MSK stands for Mobile Suit Karaba. A weird oddity then is the Rig Diaz, which is most commonly seen with the model number RMS099 and only sometimes referred to as MSA099, which would make way more sense considering who is mostly using the Rig Diaz. But anyways, there is MSZ, which is used for mobile suits that are part of the Zeta project. Then there is FXA, and the F, no idea. X might be experimental as with the Federation units, and then A probably means Anaheim, but it could also be auxiliary because that seems to be what the units with this designation are designed for. Then we also have some real-life references in the Anaheim machines, although you could just play them off as that person being the project manager or the lead designer of the machine in universe. MSN is for Nagano Mamoru Designs, and MSF is for Fujita Kazumi Designs. On to the Xeon side now, and there things are much simpler. Standard designation is MS for Mobile Suit, add a Y for Prototypes, YMS, most likely a reference to the US Air Force. You can add an M at the end for Marine Units, MSM, or an N at the end for new type machines, MSN. And the same goes for mobile armors. There's MA for a normal mobile armor, there is MAM for a marine mobile armor, and MAN for a new type mobile armor. This is then followed by a sequential number, which is in turn followed by a letter to further specify its role, like K for cannon, D for desert, etc. This has led to some interesting situations, like the Zaku Marine type first being designated as the MS-06M, but later on it was redesignated as the MSM-01. This was then when Marine units finally received their own designation. The same thing happened with new type machines, which you can learn about more in my Xeon development history, which you can watch through the link on screen right now or through the link in the description down below, also in the pinned comment. Then the various Neo-Xeon movements mostly follow the Xeon convention with their own unique spin on it. AMX is used for mobile suits during the Grips conflict and also the first Neo-Xeon war, and later units use AMS. So the A seems to stand for Axis, the M for mobile, the S for suit, and the X, I have no idea. At first I thought it was simply going to be experimental, but that doesn't really fly in this case. Their mobile armors then are AMA, again, Axis mobile armor. With the Rosen Zulu then, we even see the Y for experimental units pop up again. The numbers are also interesting because the last two digits are again sequential, but there seem to be two sequences, one that starts with a 0 and one that starts with a 1, potentially hinting at two different design teams that were working at Axis. One thing then that sets Char's Neo-Xeon apart from the others is that his movement decided to return to the MSN naming scheme for new type machines, and even decided to continue from the MSN-02 Xeon. Char must have been feeling nostalgic. The giant mobile armors then used by the various Neo-Xeon movements also have their own unique style of numbering, but they all fit in line with each other. They start with NZ, but as with many of the model numbers, we don't know exactly what it stands for. The N could stand for new type, with Z standing for something. But personally, I like to think that it stands for Neo-Xeon, because typically units with the NZ designation are like the most technologically advanced and most powerful machines around. And as we've seen with the Xeon and the Neo-Xeon, they like putting their name on their most advanced units, so I feel like it would make sense to do that with the model number. The numbers then are also sequential, but unlike other machines, all three digits are the same sequence. So the sixth unit eventually became the delightful NZ666 Kshatriya. Nice. The last model number I'll be covering today then is ARX, which only appears on the silver bullet. As always, no clarification is officially given, but I believe that it could stand for Axis Rempo Experimental, a combination of Federation and Axis naming schemes, because the silver bullet was based on the Doven Wolf, an Axis machine with model number AMX, which was in turn based on a Federation machine, the Gundam Mark V, with its model number being ORX. So combine the model number and their meaning and you get ARX. And man, that was a lot to get through already, and we're still far from done. So stay tuned for part 2, where we go over the late Universal Century machines. And don't worry, according to my current planning, that question of the week video should be out a bit sooner than usual. Anyways, as always, a big thank you to the Patreon supporters. I hope everyone watching has a great day, and I'll see you all next time.